Allen Lund Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
It's the 117th anniversary of the Wright brothers' patent on the airplane. And this is Landline Now. Earlier this month, OOIDA Executive Vice President Lewie Pugh went to Washington, D.C. to testify on Capitol Hill about the supply chain from an independent trucker's point of view. We were there as he prepped for the hearing, and today we have a behind-the-scenes look at what goes into such an appearance. Getting in an accident with an uninsured or underinsured motorist can cause a lot of stress. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford recently sat down with Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to discuss the importance of having additional coverage that will ensure you're covered if you get into a not-at-fault accident. And finally, this week, a U.S. House committee will take up several important trucking issues, some good for truckers, some not so good. I'll discuss what's happening and why it matters to you with Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, today's headlines. The truck parking crisis will take center stage at a House markup hearing tomorrow. Another major metropolitan city is considering an all-out truck parking ban. And if you've got $700 to spare, have we got a hamburger for you? And now, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. Tomorrow is going to be a busy and potentially productive day in the U.S. House with regard to trucking issues. The Transportation and Infrastructure Committee is set to mark up and vote on 18 supply chain bills on Tuesday morning. Markup hearings are the last formal step before a bill goes to the full House for a vote. That includes the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, which would allocate $755 million over a 3-year period for truck parking spaces nationwide. Based on previous hearings, the bipartisan bill is likely to pass through the committee. During a recent hearing of the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit, Chairman Rick Crawford of Arkansas noted that the bill, sponsored by Representative Mike Bost of Illinois, passed through committee last year and said the time for action is now.
Increasing the amount of available truck parking will help improve the quality of life for truck drivers while preserving safety and productivity. While truck parking was not included in OOIDA, the committee last Congress considered and passed Congressman Mike Bost's Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, which would create dedicated funding for truck parking.
The Bost bill currently has more than 24 co-sponsors representing both sides of the political aisle, and the bill has some extra juice this time around, a companion bill in the Senate, which increases the chance of passage. This is what Representative Bost told me earlier this month when I asked him about his confidence level.
As I said, last time we actually got it out of the House, but nothing churning in the Senate, so you didn't get things rolling. Now, if you have it on both sides being worked both bicameral, the idea is that if you get this clean, great. Or getting it tied with any of the other transportation bills, then you've got it. You've got the exact same language. It's already got the sponsors over there. They can work it the way they need to, and we can work it over on our side and hopefully get it to the president's desk, and that's what's vitally important.
For more information on the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, check out fightingfortruckers.com. OOIDA has thrown its full support behind the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, saying it addresses truckers' #1 safety priority. But another bill being taken up tomorrow is getting an entirely different reaction from the association. It's the so-called Drive Safety Integrity Act, which would establish an apprenticeship program for commercial drivers under the age of 21. OOIDA has come out against it, and the association is not mincing words. In its outreach to congressional staff offices, OOIDA says allowing younger drivers behind the wheel will decrease highway safety and is merely an attempt to maintain cheap labor instead of addressing long-standing problems in trucking that drive truckers out of the job, such as low pay and difficult working conditions. The Drive Safe Integrity Act would shortcut the requirements of FMCSA's Safe Driver Apprenticeship Pilot Program and force the U.S. DOT to move toward a permanent policy of allowing under 21 drivers in interstate commerce. OOIDA does note that while 3,000 apprenticeship slots were authorized under FMCSA's program, only about 10 drivers have enrolled so far. OOIDA is also coming out against another bill, H.R. 3372, which would start a pilot program for heavier trucks on roadways. The association says the bill is bad for drivers, bad for small businesses, and bad for infrastructure, as heavier trucks are less safe to operate and do greater damage to highways and bridges. Other bills up for consideration Tuesday morning include the U.S. Supply Chain Security Review Act and Supply Chain Improvement Act. We'll have details on the day's proceedings tomorrow, right here on Landline Now. The city of St. Paul, Minnesota is considering a total ban on truck parking on city streets. Right now, trucks are only prohibited from parking in residential areas. A new amendment to the city parking rules would expand that to any city street. The city council is set to take up the issue this week. If approved, St. Paul would follow in the footsteps of its sister city, Minneapolis, which put a similar ban into effect in 2021 and increased fines. That resulted in more trucks being parked in St. Paul, which says the spike in truck-lined streets has become a safety hazard and a nuisance. Volvo Trucks has signed a letter of intent to sell 1,000 electric trucks to a Swiss-based building materials company. Volvo says the first 130 trucks will be delivered to Wholesome by the end of 2024. The rest will come before 2030. Volvo says this is the largest commercial order to date for the company's electric trucks. Law enforcement in North Florida have ramped up efforts to curb trailer thefts. The state's Office of Agricultural Law Enforcement says it has recovered 33 stolen semi-trailers and a vehicle and made multiple arrests following a months-long investigation. The value of the stolen property came to more than $1.3 million, according to authorities. Officers are currently working to return the stolen trailers to their rightful owners. A North Carolina-based petroleum and chemical transportation company is growing. Eagle Transport says it's acquiring Georgia-based Bulk Carriers, Inc. Terms of the deal were not announced. Bulk Carriers, which provides dry bulk transportation services, has 22 tractors, 34 trailers, and 18 employees. They'll fold into the Eagle Transport family, which claims more than 20 terminals across the Southeast, with hundreds of tractors, trailers, and employees. And finally, how much are you willing to pay for a really good hamburger? How about $700? That's what an 8-ounce burger is going for at the Drury Beer Garden in Philadelphia right now. It's called the Gold Standard. We're talking a Wagyu meat burger with caviar, fresh black truffles, lobster flambéed with cognac, and topped with aged Irish cheddar and drizzled with honey. Sounds good, but $700 good? At least it comes with fries and a 1-ounce pour of Louis XIII cognac, which goes for around $5,000 a bottle. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations to David W. Murphy of Ivor, Virginia. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 29 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 218 years without causing a single accident. The OOIDA Safe Driving Award program is sponsored by Shell Rotella, and if you're interested in receiving the Safe Driving Award, you can find a link to more information on our website, landlinenow.com. Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, are at the Petro Truck Stop in York, Nebraska. That's located at exit 353 off Interstate 80. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for 2 years at $50, a $40 discount. You can write and post a review of the doctor who performed your DOT physical to be shared with other truckers, or look up other reviews of a doctor through the OOIDA website, ooida.com. Just go to the main menu at the upper left corner of the page and under Resources, click on Certified Medical Examiner Review. Next, we'll bring you a behind-the-scenes look at preparing for a congressional hearing. Ashley Blackford discusses uninsured or underinsured motorists with Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. And I'll cover an upcoming hearing that could lead to the truck parking bill with Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. We'll be back in just a moment with more of the program. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
You trust Prepass for more bypasses? Now let Prepass help with tolls. Prepass toll service means lower cost, one invoice for all tolls, and fewer violations. Created by truckers for truckers. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Every make, every model, in every corner of the country. Technical smarts and quality parts. That's how we roll. Bring your rig into TA Truck Service.
Landline now, welcome back.
And I want to put this question to everybody, and we'll start with you, Mr. Pugh.
Mr. Pugh.
Mr. Pugh, I wanted to kind of follow up on some of the comments that you made.
Lewie Pugh was a popular guy in Washington, D.C. on May 10th. The executive vice president of OOIDA was there to testify before a House subcommittee hearing on the supply chain.
I would like to welcome Mr. Pugh and thank him for coming to testify on this very important issue on the supply chain and answer questions on how we can improve it. Thank you.
Lawmakers wanted to know what types of challenges are still out there post-pandemic and what can be done about them. So there he was, sitting before a couple dozen elected officials, answering questions and dishing out the knowledge he's accumulated over the course of a decades-long trucking career, the last several of which have been spent advocating for truck drivers as executive VP of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. But much like a television show or a movie, the final product, in this case Pugh's testimony, is the result of lots of hard work. And not just Pugh's hard work, but the hard work of the staff around him. And that's the story we'll be telling today.
And this question is directed at Mr. Pugh.
Mr. Pugh?
Is that correct, Mr. Pugh? Mr. Pugh, your comments on these driver issues, I just want to recap them because I think they're important.
It's a cool Wednesday morning at OOIDA's offices in Washington, D.C., a stone's throw from the U.S. Department of Transportation headquarters in the Navy Yard neighborhood. Pugh is sitting at a conference table going over the speech he will give in a couple of hours to members of the House Highways and Transit Subcommittee. After a last-minute check of his notes, Pugh leaves the building for a roughly 10-minute walk to the Rayburn House Office building, where the hearing will take place. Colin Long, OOIDA Director of Government Affairs, and George O'Connor, OOIDA Director of Communications, are along with him on the walk through the metal detectors and security, and eventually into a waiting room for witnesses and support staff. In the minutes leading up to the hearing, lawmakers and the gallery filter in. Some are hobnobbing. Others are shuffling notes, among them members of the subcommittee prepping for the business at hand. And on this day, in room 2167 of the Rayburn building, the business at hand is the supply chain, namely the challenges facing it. Pugh is here repping small business truckers who can often get forgotten as the gears of progress churn. Pugh has a lot on his mind, and his opening statement is a summary of the biggest issues. Truck parking.
Truckers struggle to find a safe place to park, wasting nearly an hour of productive time each day searching for a place to rest.
Restroom access and overtime pay.
They are routinely denied access to restrooms at the facilities where they pick up and deliver. Detention time, which is the unproductive time they waste at shippers and receivers waiting to be unloaded, continues to increase, and many of these truckers are not paid for these hours due to there's federal regulation exempting employee drivers from overtime pay.
Speed limiters and the EPA's heavy-duty emission rules.
And despite no requirement to do so, the administration is moving forward with an extremely unpopular speed limiter mandate that will slow the movement of freight, increase crash rates, and worsen driver recruitment and retention. EPA has launched a multifaceted attack on vehicles our members operate, dramatically will increase the cost and purchase and operation of trucks.
And that's just the start. From the start of Pugh's opening remarks, he'll answer questions about these issues over the next couple hours, alongside three other members of the panel, representatives from the Teamsters, the Transportation Intermediaries Association, and National Association of Truck Stop Owners. 24 members of this House subcommittee will speak on this morning, and all but 3 of them ask questions of Pugh, as Colin Long points out.
Yeah, Louie's already bragging about these numbers. 21 of them questions towards Lewie.
And while some of them are not expected, many of them are, and that's by design. They're the result of meetings and emails and text messages between the staff of lawmakers and the D.C. staff of OOIDA.
I mean, it starts with talking to the Committee of Jurisdiction and reminding them that we are experts on these issues, and we're always willing to come before them and testify. So, I mean, you got to start there. And then once you get the invitation to do so, then the wheels really start moving. And we as a staff, an entire staff, I mean, it's not just one lobbyist, it takes a team effort. We start prepping the media. George, our communications director, will reach out to press who have covered our issues or who we hope to have cover our issues and try and get them interested in what Lewie is going to be saying at the hearing. And then from a Capitol Hill perspective, we go to congressional offices and not only prepare them for what Lewie is going to be testifying on, but also try to plant questions, favorable questions that Lewie can, I don't want to say softballs. I mean, honestly, we want a good dialogue and we want to make our points any way we can, even if that is defending some of our points.
So, does Long have any idea how many meetings Pugh had on Capitol Hill leading up to his testimony?
No, because it's mission impossible. I mean, I can keep track of how many I schedule through Outlook, but yesterday, and I won't name names, we went to visit a member of Congress who wasn't on the committee to do a little bit of follow-up on a specific issue. And in that meeting, there happened to be another member of Congress who poked his head in, and we got a 2-for-1 basically, and that happens a lot. And with Lewie being on the Hill frequently and being a really engaged member in the political process, he's going to brag about this, hearing me say this too. But members of Congress actually recognize him in the halls of Congress. And sometimes when we're just walking through the halls, we'll pass someone and they'll say, "Oh, hey, Lewie, good to see you," because they had met him at a previous event or they were here when he testified before a committee previously. And those conversations are sometimes the most valuable because there's that recognition and that recollection of who Lewie is, what he stands for, and the issues he's pursuing. And a lot of times we see good results come from that.
The evening before the hearing and in between meetings on Capitol Hill, Pugh, Long, and O'Connor grab a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant. Long glances down at his phone. It's a message from a congressional staffer which prompts Long to pepper Pugh with questions about congestion tolling and the effect it has on the supply chain. Another possible line of questioning Pugh could get the next day at the hearing, and that's exactly what happened. The question came from Congressman Anthony D'Esposito of New York, prompting Pugh to talk about how congestion tolling can make a driver's day that much harder.
When it comes to tolling and congestion pricing, that's a killer on small business trucking. And it's probably a killer on some of Ms. Rinke's members too, because they have to try to get this into the rates. It's hard to get these tolls. I know myself in New York, I ran New York City a lot from Ohio. I spent $10,000 to $12,000 a year in just tolls.
Pugh probably would have been ready to answer that without much prep, but it certainly helps. Pugh and Long go back and forth over and over again in the days leading up to the hearing, giving Pugh a chance to get his thoughts together and the OOIDA staff members a chance to fine-tune the answers, add context where it's needed, especially for folks who aren't well-versed in trucking matters, and cut the fat to make the best use of his time at the witness table, where time is limited. And while the prep work is valuable, Long says the underlying strategy with Pugh is a bit simpler, letting Lewie be Lewie.
We have an ace in the hole. I mean, Lewie knows just about every issue that would have come up yesterday. So as far as preparing him for the unexpected, you can't really prepare for the unexpected. I mean, you can say, well, you may hear about this from someone, but there's no assurance that's going to happen. But the beauty of having Lewie testify is he can handle those questions on the fly. I think he demonstrated that pretty well yesterday. Even if someone's coming at him sideways on an issue, he can turn it around and talk about the impact or the effect that these specific policies will have on the men and women who make their living on the road. And I think that is powerful.
And this is something Pugh alluded to during his testimony.
As the subcommittee works to understand what's led to the supply chain challenges and how they can be fixed, I strongly encourage you to listen to the men and women who are out there on the road every day.
Pugh has been one of those people out there on the road every day, so Long says his words hold extra weight, as opposed to someone who's never held a CDL or even been behind the wheel of a semi.
Well, I'll toot our horn and say a lot of that is due to hard work of staff, but that's a fraction of the reason Lewie got the attention. I think people like hearing from the folks who actually look and sound like truckers when they're talking about trucking policies. Some of our members may not be convinced of that, but in reality, and I think it was demonstrated yesterday, is that people want to hear from the real experts on the road, and the real experts on the road are truckers. So when there's a trucker-themed hearing going on, having someone there who can say, I have 2.5 million miles of safe driving, that's going to generate some interest amongst committee members to figure out How were you able to stay in this industry so long when we see retention rates that are sky high? And how were you capable of amassing 2.5 million miles of safe driving when we hear about crash rates going up? And I think it not only generated interest amongst committee members, but I think when Lewie talks about these issues, he's immediately viewed as being a legitimate and credible source because of his experience and his background.
Take, for example, the way Pugh frames his answer to a question about truck parking.
Truckers want to be safe more than anybody out there. That's their office. It's where they work, out there on the highway. And it's very stressful. I don't know if anyone's ever went on vacation and, didn't make hotel arrangements and hunt around for a motel, and you're trying to find a place to sleep, and it's hard. And that happens to normal people. This happens to truckers every day. They can't find a place. They want to take a break. Maybe they want to be an hour down the road. Truckers, a lot of times, are paid by the mile, so they want to, be as efficient in their day as they can be. But a lot of times they have to stop short, maybe 100, 150 miles.
It's something lawmakers probably wouldn't know about or even understand because they've never had to plan so far ahead just to park their vehicle. Another example, this question from Representative Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey.
Mr. Pugh, these questions are for you. I got one on time for one. Is there any reason that truckers shouldn't be paid overtime like most other blue-collar employees? And if this exemption were to be repealed, what do you think the impact would be?
I think, for one, if the impact would be truckers would have a greater love for Congress. And yes, I think it will improve safety. It will improve drivers' lives. It will improve retention. The same people that are pushing for speed limiters because they say trucks need to slow down are the same people that are against paying truckers overtime. Trucking for as long has been a piecework industry where you're paid by the mile. My opinion would be if you pay truckers by the mile and you have some crazy concern that truckers are going flying down the highway, which they're not, but if that's what you think, probably paying them by the hour and paying them overtime would automatically put them to where they should be going if that's what you're trying to get at.
For more than 2 hours, Pugh answers questions like this about speed limiters and overtime pay and truck parking and more, and then it's over. After all the meetings and all the preparation, the show comes to a close, but the work does not. Here's Colin Long the day after the hearing.
I mean, I've spent my entire day. It's now, 1:19. I got here a little after 8. Just sending follow-up emails to members of the committee reminding them, hey, your boss talked about speed limiters. Maybe they might want to support us on our speed limiter bill. And hey, I know you were at the hearing yesterday. A lot of discussion about truck parking. I noticed your boss still isn't co-sponsor. Maybe you'd consider getting on board. It's been a lot of follow-up, especially with staff, trying to convince them to help us out on all those various topics we were talking about. And it crosses the political spectrum. I've been emailing extremely liberal offices, extremely conservative offices, trying to find issues that we want to advance that appeal to them. I mean, we're not going to get Democrats on our speed limiter bill. We know that. Can they help us out with overtime pay? Absolutely. So it's finding the fertile ground and taking advantage of it following that hearing. And I think the hearing was great because it gave everyone on the subcommittee something they could advance, something they could kind of gravitate to and say, that's something I can support. That's a way I can help the truckers. And that's all based on preparation.
Another point Long wants to hammer home, that OOIDA can only do so much. Just as Pugh's voice holds extra weight because he's walked the walk, Long says outreach from working truck drivers hold more weight than they might realize.
I think it's important that folks remember we only get these opportunities once every year or two to have Lewie testify before a committee and talk about the needs of truckers. And it's really important to have our members be active in the political process throughout. I mean, right now there's a lot more attention on truck parking, on speed limiters, on FLSA, because Lewie was talking about it to members of Congress in a very public setting. But to have drivers continue to put pressure on members of Congress to help make their career more sustainable, more safe, is just as important as Lewie coming up and testifying before the subcommittee. In fact, it's probably more important.
If you're interested in giving that a shot, check out fightingfortruckers.com. Scott Thompson, Landline Now, and we're back in just a moment.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours. Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Landline Now, welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, ladies?
Very well.
Doing good, Ashley. Today we are talking about uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage. First off, can you explain what that means?
So really, it kind of explains itself. Uninsured and underinsured motorist. Sometimes, actually a lot of times on your policy, regardless of whether it's personal or commercial auto, you'll see it abbreviated as UM,
Of course.
So, of course, Ashley hates our acronyms. But if we do happen to use that today, we're talking about uninsured and underinsured motorist, and really that's just additional, as every insurance is. It's just additional protection for in the case that you're either hit by an uninsured or underinsured motorist, somebody who has maybe state minimum limits that doesn't have enough to pay for property damage or bodily injury.
So you're involved in an accident with someone and they're at fault. And there's a lot of cases where they either have no insurance or they don't have enough to cover your damages. And I mean, that's just kind of the layman's terms of it. And we see it a lot. I mean, especially with commercial trucks, because if it's the four-wheeler or the personal auto at fault, and like Trista said, they've got a state minimum limit, sometimes the damage to a semi-truck is extensive, and their limits just aren't enough to cover the repairs.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say here that this is really where the difference lies with the expectations for trucks and their insurance and the expectations for four-wheelers and their insurance. You really almost have to be at least insured for liability, the protection of the public, if you're driving a big truck, because you've got numbers on the side of your truck, and in order for those numbers to be active, or if you get stopped by DOT and find out that that's inactive because there's no insurance, there's no filing, there's no proof of coverage, you're put out of service. But for personal autos, they're not held to the same expectation.
Right.
And that's where things get really tough, because if, as a trucker, if you're involved with a personal auto, there are a lot of personal autos that are uninsured. And, you would be surprised at how many of those you see on the road.
So how is insurance handled if there is an accident and the truck driver isn't at fault, but the other party is, and their personal auto coverage isn't enough to clean up the damage, or they have no insurance?
If they have no insurance, then ideally the not at fault party has uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. And some states do allow them to reject it. So it's not a given that the not at fault party is going to have that. And I would say it depends on the insurance companies involved as well. It's possible that they could pursue legal action against the at-fault party, some sort of a suit to try and recoup the loss. Otherwise, it's a lot of times it goes back to the not at fault party's insurance policy.
And also that is dependent on the state limits. A lot of times, or the state guidelines. Some states just have that uninsured motorist for your bodily injury. Some of it require it for small amounts of property damage as well. But and I'll use Missouri as an example because, that's where we are. But theirs is only $10,000 for that property damage. If you're driving, a $100,000 truck, you've only got $10,000 of uninsured motorist for your property damage. So a lot of it is really going to be, aside from the insurance companies or the at-fault party or the not at-fault party, a lot of it's going to be dependent on the state guidelines as well.
Well, and not to veer off topic.
Which I did.
I was not calling you out. I'm about to do it too. We've talked about physical damage quite a bit, and we've talked about how we recommend having it even if you don't have a lien on the truck. And this would be one of those situations where, again, we would recommend it even if there's no loan, for the simple fact that...
Absolutely. Good point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I make those. A lot of uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage is just for bodily injury. And so if you don't have a physical damage policy and the other part is only for bodily injury, then you may not have any, and the other party's uninsured, you may not have any kind of coverage to fix or repair your truck or replace it.
Yes.
And so it's just one more plug, I guess, to say physical damage is very important in these situations because it's kind of a safety net. Mm-hmm. So even if you're not at fault, and no one wants to have their insurance pay a claim when they're not at fault. But going back to what Trista said, it's not as regulated for personal autos as it is for commercial. And so sometimes it does fall back on your coverage, unfortunately. And, we just want everyone to have the proper coverage in place to be present in that kind of situation.
Yeah, and not be put in a bind, because if you've ever been involved in a claim, to be honest, like the claim itself is an issue, dealing with the other party or the fallout from the accident. The last thing that you want to deal with is the fallout for having to pay for the damages that a not at fault party contributed to when, because you're not covered properly.
Is this coverage mandatory in any states?
Yeah, some states do require it. Some states give an option to accept it or reject it. And, it really can go into multiple different scenarios here. Some insurance companies may offer more than the state minimum. Some may not. They may just offer the minimum amount that the state requires. It's so inexpensive, even the states that allow you to reject it. We'll have callers that sometimes will try to keep that off because they're trying to keep cost as low as possible. But a lot of the time when we tell them it's $5 a month or, somewhere around there, a lot of times they realize it's low cost enough to go ahead and have it on the policy.
Yeah.
And I think we've mentioned this before, it's not so much how safe you drive because you're dealing with other people on the road.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part about some of these incidents.
And the part you can't control. I mean, you can drive defensively and try to, but in the end, you can't control. You can only control yourself.
An example, there was a link emailed to us recently about an accident that involved a tanker trailer catching fire. And it did appear to be the personal auto's fault. And we keep comparing it like commercial and personal. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's two semi-trucks on your personal vehicle. Sometimes it's two four-wheelers, two autos. It can be any kind of scenario. But this one was a commercial vehicle and a personal auto. The question that came with the email was, in an accident like this, how is insurance handled? Because the car won't have enough. Well, of course not. Like sometimes even if they purchase higher than the state minimum, a tanker fire is a pretty big accident. Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a lot of property damage.
Cleanup.
Yeah, damage to the equipment, possible EPA, hazmat type situations. In that scenario, the car probably isn't going to have enough to even touch that.
Even if they have insurance, which you're crossing your fingers there.
Right.
Maybe they're out of a state that only requires the bodily injury coverage, and there's just a lot to go into that and making sure that you are insured properly.
And it seems like such a simple, low cost coverage, and the more we talk about it, the more we're like, but it could be restricted here. It might be minimal here. There really are a lot of layers to this.
But like the scenario you were just mentioning, I mean, if the personal auto is unlikely to have enough coverage, that then falls on the truck driver.
Yeah, the underinsured motorist coverage at that point.
Yeah. And the insurance company could always go back, subrogate. I'm sure you've heard us use that term. They could always subrogate against the at-fault party. But especially in the case that they're not carrying insurance anyway, what is the likelihood that they're going, that, an insurance company spends this money to go to court and get, some sort of a garnishment or whatever on wages that maybe don't even exist. I mean, you've got all kinds of scenarios to think about, and that's not always the case. But sometimes that's the case with an uninsured motorist.
Have you ever had, someone call and you mention this coverage and they say like, well, that's on them. If they're not insured or if they're uninsured or underinsured, that's on them. What's your response to that?
And it is on them. Honestly, it is on the at-fault party.
And that question and comment is, we do hear that.
Yeah. And so I understand. I'm totally empathetic with our insured is coming from. But the fact of the matter is, in the event of a court case, because somebody needs to get paid, especially for that, say highway damage or whatever the case might be, they're going to bring all parties involved in a suit, so it's going to be the at-fault party, the not at-fault party. And, it could save you in the long run,
right?
Just, to pay $4 or $5 a month.
Well, and trying to put this as delicately as possible, a lot of times if someone is uninsured, it's because of a financial pinch that they're in. And,
That's much nicer than what I said. Yes, I like it.
But, so if you think about the fact that they don't have insurance because they couldn't afford to pay it that month or whatever the case may be, what's the likelihood that you're going to be able to pursue them in a lawsuit and actually get your $50,000 worth of damages or, and that's kind of what we have to say to the callers sometimes. Like it shouldn't be on you, but the fact of the matter is we've seen multiple claims, multiple scenarios in our personal life and at work where this has come up. And like Trista said, for the extra few bucks a month, it's just good to have. It's definitely recommended.
Worth it.
Can you talk to me about personal injury protection?
Oh, no.
Thanks for asking. Yeah. And the abbreviation you will see for that commonly is PIP. Some states require that and some don't. It's sort of like a med pay coverage. So again, if that uninsured motorist were to hit you, it would pay, it's personal injury protection for yourself. It would pay, the cost of your medical bills. A lot of times you'll see a low limit on that, like $2,500. And really that's kind of meant just to cover your deductible or catastrophic medical policy or whatever that you might already have. This is, the personal injury protection would typically be in addition to that or helpful with that.
Unlike the uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage, the personal injury protection is not required in every state. It's not even an option in every state. The UMUIM is. Every state, will have some amount to offer for the UMUIM. But with the PIP, sometimes it's called MedPay. It's not always called the same exact thing, or maybe it might be a little more in addition to that that's offered. Again, like Trista said, minimal amounts, but it's really going to depend on the state you're in.
And the state that comes to mind for me is Kansas right away.
Mine is Michigan.
Okay, well, that makes sense too. I know in Kansas, or it used to be, I could be off on the limit, but you're looking at a $2,500 limit. So Michigan, I'll let you.
Well, Michigan's just a no-fault state, so it's usually comparable to your policy limits.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. Well, ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, Look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. This week, a U.S. House committee will take up several important trucking issues, some good for truckers, some maybe not so good. Here to discuss what's happening and why it matters to you is Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Colin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's exciting times here in D.C.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, it seems like. It's been very busy here.
Mm-hmm.
This hearing is coming up yet this week. What is the stated reason for this hearing and what committee is handling it?
Well, it's the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which I'm sure most folks are familiar with. They have jurisdiction over most of our issues in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it's going to be a markup tomorrow. So they're going to consider several bills that have kind of an overarching theme, and that theme is supply chain. House Republicans have made it a priority in their majority to improve the supply chain, and a lot of their focus tomorrow will be on the trucking industry's role in the supply chain, and that's kind of a double-edged sword, like you mentioned in your intro. I mean, there's some good, there's some bad. We're trying to make sure that good moves through the committee and it ultimately reaches the House floor, and some of the bad bills hopefully are defeated on a bipartisan basis. But overall, we appreciate the fact that the committee is focusing on the supply chain and trying to improve the supply chain. That's certainly good for our members. We just wish they would have latched onto a couple more of our proposals to improve the supply chain. But there are some high notes, and I look forward to talking about those.
Well, you mentioned that they're combining a lot of issues and frankly, a lot of bills into one big package. Just a devil's advocate question, because I know there are people that wonder about this. Why is it that they do that instead of considering each of these separately?
Well, they are going to move them separately through committee. I don't know what happens when we get to the floor. Maybe they combine them into some sort of omnibus supply chain package. I'm not entirely sure. That might make it easier for them to pass some of these more controversial elements. But tomorrow they're going to vote on individual bills, and it's interesting to see because we don't really know where some of these new members stand on a lot of these issues. And I mention new members simply because there's so many on the committee. I mean, we've had a lot of turnover in Congress over the last couple of years, and a lot of these new members don't really have voting records on a lot of issues that are significant to trucking. So tomorrow's going to be interesting. It's going to be a little bit of a wild card. We don't necessarily know what to expect from folks.
Well, let's discuss some of the measures that are being considered.
Sure.
And chief of interest to our audience is truck parking. What is on the table there?
Well, the bill that everyone at OOIDA has been promoting for a couple of years now, the bill introduced by Representatives Mike Bost, a Republican of Illinois, and Andrew Craig, a Democrat of Minnesota, is up for consideration. And if you remember, that provides over $750 million for truck parking capacity expansion projects across the country. And we're really, really glad the committee has continued to show their support for truck parking. If you remember, they passed this bill last year. Unfortunately, it didn't reach the House floor, but they're kind of picking up where they left off. And we expect a big bipartisan show of support for this issue. I mean, when our Vice President Lewie Pugh was here in D.C. 2 weeks ago to talk to, or I should say to testify before the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit, which is kind of a subcommittee of this larger committee that is considering these bills tomorrow, we got a lot of support for truck parking. I think a lot of heads on a bipartisan basis were nodding along with Lewie when he talked about the need to invest in truck parking. So we're really hopeful this bill is going to advance through the committee tomorrow and hopefully find its way to the House floor relatively soon.
Just a question kind of on the overall atmosphere there in D.C. right now. without going too far into it, we have these negotiations over the debt ceiling, which include calls for cutting spending.
Yeah.
Is that focus on spending cutting going to affect the truck parking bill? Is there a chance there it could get caught up in that?
It very well may. I mean, there are conservatives on the committee who aren't going to be that jazzed about passing a bill that authorizes $750 million for truck parking, especially on the heels of a massive highway bill and infrastructure bill, the IIJA bill that passed just a couple of years ago. But, we remind folks this is one of the glaring omissions of the highway bill from 2 years ago. It seemed like a no-brainer to us, and then it never found its way into the final product because of some problems over in the Senate. But the federal government contributes to the truck parking crisis simply because the rigidity of hours of service, the rigidity of the electronic logging device mandate, it doesn't give our members this flexibility they need to find safe parking all the time. And I mean, that's only a part of the problem. I mean, there just frankly aren't enough spaces for the number of drivers looking for them at any given time. So we think the federal government needs to be an active participant in solving the problem. The best way to do that is to provide funding. So hopefully the concerns of conservatives are eventually outweighed by the need for Congress to actually direct the Department of Transportation in how to most effectively and most safely spend their money, which we think this bill does.
Let's talk about some of the other provisions of interest. And there are some in there that I know that OOIDA has traditionally opposed, one of which is 18 to 21-year-old drivers.
Mm-hmm.
We have a pilot program, I believe, that is underway now. So what are they looking at doing beyond that?
We do. And I just want to be clear, this pilot program, up until now, I don't think anyone would argue with the fact that it's been a failure. I mean, the last we checked, there were only 10 drivers registered for it. It's been open for months. So the problem with this bill, and it's called the Drive Safe Integrity Act. It's kind of a dubious name, but what they hope to do is basically say, unless the Department of Transportation can determine that drivers in this pilot program are less safe than older drivers, we'll just open the roads to 18, 21-year-olds once this pilot program has finished its course. And we kind of think, what type of data and analysis and clarity are you getting when there's 10 drivers in the program? That doesn't speak to the population of 18, 19, 20-year-old drivers who could be entering the industry at the end of the apprenticeship program. So we certainly oppose this because we think that, first off, we didn't support the apprenticeship program, but if it's in place, I mean, let it run its course and then make a decision about letting 18, 19, 20-year-olds in. Don't try to tie the hands of DOT just to get to the result you couldn't get because of political opposition a couple of years ago.
Another thing in here is truck size and weight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an issue that really seemed to have calmed down in recent years, but it's back.
Yeah, zombie issues.
There we go. What specifically is being proposed here?
Well, there's a bill proposing a 10-year pilot program. I've never heard of a pilot program that lasts a decade. But here we go. And it would allow states to basically allow motor carriers to haul up to 91,000 pounds, which is a pretty dramatic increase over the current threshold of 81,000 pounds. And our concern with this is it's going to create a new de facto industry standard in all those states, and our members are going to have to upgrade their equipment just to remain competitive with larger carriers who can absorb those costs over time. And the biggest problem with truck weight increases is that you might be hauling more payload, but chances are if you're a small business trucker, you're not going to be able to charge more in rates. And if you're a driver, you're not going to see any more in compensation. So this bill's a loser on a number of levels. And then there's also this industry or commodity specific bill to allow folks hauling electric vehicles to carry overweight loads. And this one really frustrates us because if you think about it, here we are allowing electric vehicle haulers to haul heavier loads, which will do more damage to our roads. Meanwhile, EVs don't pay a penny into the Highway Trust Fund to maintain those roads. So it's really frustrating for us to see proposals like this come out, especially if we're being honest and not overly political. with Republican support. I mean, it kind of boggles the mind on this front. And we'll see how it pans out tomorrow.
Okay. Well, Colin, we're running out of time here. Is there anything else coming up in this hearing that you think people need to know about?
You know, I think focusing on defeating these bad proposals is going to be key. And if we don't succeed tomorrow at markup, we're certainly going to have to succeed on the House floor. So I hope everyone keeps an eye on these and is prepared to weigh in when the time is necessary down the road, because it may be coming.
Okay. Colin, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
I've been talking with Colin Long of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And folks, call your members of Congress about these issues. The number is 202-224-3121. Thank you for joining our show today. We'll be back tomorrow with more. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome, and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us.
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.